There is a whisper in your soul. It's been there since the beginning. Before your name, before your pain, before the world ever told you who you should be, it whispered gently like a breeze through eternity. You are already whole. But most people miss the whisper. They run so fast trying to fix what was never broken. They scream their questions into the noise of the world, never realizing that the answer never raised its voice. You don't need a breakdown to have a breakthrough. You don't need your life to fall apart to begin seeing clearly. But so often we wait. We wait until the shout, until life yells through the wreckage, through the sickness, through the heartbreak, through the loss to finally get our attention. But life is kind enough to whisper first. And if you quiet your mind, even just for a moment, you'll hear it again. It speaks not in words, but in knowing, not in volume, but in presence. It is the language of your soul. And it never forces itself upon you. It waits with love. It is not punishment that arrives when you ignore the whisper. It is the echo of unconsciousness. When we forget who we are, life becomes louder. Not because it's cruel, but because love will use any means to wake you up. The illness, the heartbreak, the sudden loss. These are not punishments. They are invitations. Invitations back to your truth, back to your being, back to the eternal stillness that lives behind your story. But the ego resists whispers. It wants a flashing sign, a guarantee, a checklist. It doesn't understand the sacred because the sacred cannot be grasped, only surrendered to. The whisper says, let go. The ego replies, the whisper says, be still. The ego replies, not now. The whisper says, you are free. The ego replies, not until I get what I want. And so life waits until the noise becomes unbearable, until the chasing becomes exhausting, until the mask cracks under its own weight. And when that happens, when you fall to your knees, you don't fall into failure. You fall into the truth. There is wisdom in surrender, not giving up, but giving in. Giving in to the deeper current beneath the surface of your life. There's an intelligence guiding everything, a love that does not waver. And it's been trying to reach you. Not through the storm, but through the silence before it. You see, the whisper is always kind. It never criticizes. It never rushes. It never shames because the whisper is the voice of your soul. And your soul knows no fear. It has never been wounded. It is untouched by trauma, time, or title. But the ego lives loudly. It demands, it justifies, it reacts, it lives in the past or the future, anywhere but now. And it tells you that you must strive to be worthy. That peace is a destination far away. That love must be earned. But here is the liberating truth. The ego is not you. It is a costume, a character, a collection of borrowed ideas you've mistaken for identity. You are not your anxiety. You are not your failures. You are not the name they gave you, the roles you play, or the stories you tell. You are not what happened to you. You are the awareness behind it all. And when you realize this not as a concept, but as an awakening, you return to stillness, to simplicity, to peace. The whisper leads you there. It does not demand change. It reveals who you were before the world trained you to forget. And it doesn't speak in thunder because it doesn't need to. Only love can whisper and be heard without force. When you begin to listen again, you'll realize the whisper never left. You just stopped trusting quiet things. You started confusing chaos with aliveness. But real aliveness is not noise. It is presence. It is the feeling of being rooted in this moment with no need to escape it. Healing begins in that space, not in fixing your past, but in no longer dragging it with you. Not in rewriting the story, but in dropping the need to tell it at all. The soul does not speak in history. It speaks in presence. That's why the whisper always speaks in now. Right here, not when you get the job, not when they apologize, not when the weight is gone or the bank account is full. Now, and when you live from now, you are free from the tyranny of someday, free from the illusion that salvation is in the future, free from the suffering that comes from resisting what already is. Life is not trying to punish you. It's trying to wake you. That's why the whisper comes first. That's why the nudge arrives before the shake. But if you ignore the gentle voice, life may send a louder one. Not because life is cruel, but because it loves you too much to let you sleep forever. You don't have to reach rock bottom to rise. That is a myth created by those who waited too long to listen. The whisper is always offering a gentler path, a way through without the crash. But it requires trust. It requires the courage to follow the invisible, to honor the intangible, to step without knowing where the ground will appear. That's the spiritual journey. not towards something outside of you, but inward, where truth has always been patiently waiting. The greatest tragedy is not in falling, but in pretending you never had wings. The whisper tries to remind you you are not bound to this earth. You are rooted in the eternal. You are not the small self that clings and worries and controls. You are the vastness behind it, the silence between the words, the breath before the thought. And when you begin to identify with that, with the space, not the structure, life begins to realign. You no longer chase peace like a destination. You become it. There is a knowing inside you that no book can teach, a wisdom born not of intellect, but of intimacy with your own being. And the more you silence the mind, the more that knowing rises, not as noise, but as a calm certainty that doesn't need to convince anyone. The whisper is not for your ego. It's for your soul. That's why it's often missed. In the noise of ambition, in the clamor of comparison, in the addiction to always needing more, you can spend your whole life climbing the ladder of success only to find it was leaning against the wrong wall. Or you can pause. You can step back. You can ask yourself the question most people are too afraid to ask. What if I already have what I'm searching for? That's the kind of question the whisper brings. It doesn't promise more. It points to what's already here. It doesn't inflate your identity. It dissolves what's false. The soul does not scream. It doesn't hustle. It doesn't perform. It simply is. And to return to that state, to remember your original nature, is not the end of your journey. It is the awakening that changes how you walk it. The same life, the same people, the same circumstances, but no longer the same you. Because now you're listening. Now you're attuned. Now you don't need the shout. You trust the whisper. And trust that is the most radical act in a world addicted to control. To trust means you stop managing every outcome. You stop negotiating with life. You stop bargaining with God. You surrender not in weakness, but in profound wisdom. Because you've seen enough to know the river flows whether you swim or fight. And peace comes not by controlling the current, but by letting go of the illusion that you ever could. People say, but how do I know if it's the whisper or just my mind? You'll know. No. The whisper feels like home. It feels like truth stripped of performance. It doesn't rush you. It relieves you. It doesn't ask you to prove anything. It invites you to be. It may not speak in words, but it speaks in clarity. It arrives as a quiet, knowing that needs no justification. The mind argues, the soul recognizes. And here is the great spiritual paradox. What you've been searching for is the one who's been looking. You are not a seeker. You are what is sought. And the whisper tries to return you to that awareness. But if you ignore it long enough, life will shout. It will shout through burnout, through emptiness, through disease, through relationships that break your heart open just wide enough to let the light in. It's not punishment. It's purification, not cruelty correction. You are not being tested by life. You are being shown where you are still asleep. And every shout is really a mirror reflecting the places within you that still resist surrender. But you don't have to wait for that. You can choose presence before the pain. You can respond to the nudge before the fall. You can awaken without collapse. That's the mercy of the universe. Gives you thousands of chances to come home. It sends you signs in the smallest moments. A feather on the sidewalk, a stranger's smile, a line in a song that feels like it was written just for you. These are not coincidences. These are conversations. The whisper is always trying to speak through your life. But if your mind is too loud, you'll miss it. Let your life become a prayer, not of words, but a listening. A posture of openness, a willingness to be surprised by grace, because grace doesn't shout either. It simply arrives and softens everything it touches. It doesn't argue its case. It transforms. And the more you live from the whisper, the more you begin to see the world not as a place to conquer, but as a mystery to honor. You weren't sent here to fix everything. You were sent here to remember the truth that lives beneath all the doing, the you before the roles, the you before the expectations, the eternal spark that can never be dimmed by circumstance. The whisper speaks from that place. And when you live from there, you no longer react, you respond. You no longer grasp, you allow. You no longer fear, you trust. And slowly the shouting fades, not because life gets easier, but because you are no longer resisting it. You've stopped running. You've stopped blaming. You've stopped waiting for permission to be who you already are. And in that stillness, the whisper becomes your guide. And the more you trust it, the louder it becomes, not in volume, but in presence. It begins to shape your decisions. It begins to lead your life. There's nothing louder than a whisper that comes from God. It can silence every fear. It can dissolve every doubt. Not because the fear or doubt disappears, but because you stop identifying with them. You stop believing that your thoughts are who you are. You stop worshiping your emotions as facts. You begin to realize that you are the space they move through, not the content, but the container. This is the truth that liberates. You are not here to control the storm. You are here to become the calm inside it. And that calm, that center, that divine still point is the whisper. And once you return to it, you begin to live differently. You speak with intention. You move with grace. You love without needing return. You listen without needing to respond. You no longer need validation because you are validation. You are the proof of something holy. You begin to realize that life was never happening to you, was always happening for you. Even the pain, especially the pain, not because pain is divine, but because it strips away what is not. It dissolves the illusion that you were ever separate from love. It brings you to the edge of yourself so that you can finally see what you are beyond your name, your body, your narrative. And at that edge in the silence, the whisper speaks again. You were never alone. There is a sacred intelligence moving through all things, through birth and death, through joy and sorrow, through beginnings and endings. It is not chaotic. It is orchestrated, but not by your ego, not by your plans. It moves with a rhythm that only surrender can hear. And the whisper is the beat of that rhythm. It's the quiet knowing that what falls away is not a loss. It is a return. What leaves is not rejection. It is redirection. But when you resist the whisper, life must speak louder. The job ends. The relationship breaks. The diagnosis arrives, not to hurt you, but to shake you into awareness, to turn your eyes from distraction to devotion, to remind you that the treasure is never out there. You are not a mistake that needs correcting. You are a miracle that forgot its name, and every shout from life is really an echo of your soul saying, come back. And when you come back, you see differently. You no longer view your past as something to escape, but as something that brought you here. Every wound becomes a window. Every scar becomes a doorway, not to bitterness, but to depth, to humility, to compassion. Because when you live from the whisper, even your pain becomes sacred. It softens you. It refines you. It teaches you to feel without drowning, to grieve without losing yourself, to be broken without being destroyed. People ask, but what if I miss the whisper? What if I've ignored it for too long? The whisper holds no resentment. It doesn't tally your absence. It simply waits, like the ocean waits for the river to remember its way home. You can return in a moment with one breath, one prayer, one surrender. Because the whisper was never gone, your attention was. And attention is the gateway to transformation. Begin to pay attention not to what the world shouts, but to what your soul whispers. Pay attention to the pull that defies logic, to the peace that doesn't make sense, to the invitation that shows up without evidence. Because the soul doesn't need proof. It is proof. It is the evidence of something eternal living inside your temporary form. And it will never demand that you hustle to earn what you already are. This is the paradox of spiritual awakening. You lose everything that was never truly yours. And in doing so, you find what can never be taken. You lose your need to be right and gain the peace of being real. You lose your masks and find your face. You lose your urgency and discover timelessness. And all of this begins not with a shout, but with a whisper. The world is loud. It sells you fear, distraction, urgency, but the soul is still. It offers you presence, clarity, eternity, and the choice is always yours. Will you live from the noise or from the knowing? Will you follow the crowd or the current of your own being? Will you wait until life has to shout, or will you sit long enough to hear the whisper? There is no punishment for forgetting, only the pain of misalignment. When you stray from the whisper, life feels heavy. You begin to carry what was never yours. You say yes when your soul says no. You stay when your spirit is already gone. You cling when you were meant to flow. And that heaviness, that resistance is not failure, it's feedback. It's the soul saying this is not your truth. And the whisper, it is the guide that always knows the way back. It doesn't need GPS or logic or permission. It simply knows. And when you trust it, even when it makes no sense, you enter the realm of miracles. Because a miracle is not something that defies nature. It is something that aligns with your true nature. It is what happens when you stop living from fear and start living from truth. You'll know you're living from the whisper when peace becomes more important than being right, when presence becomes more valuable than performance, when alignment matters more than achievement, when love becomes less about possession and more about expression. This is not weakness. It is power, the quietest kind of power, the power that cannot be taken away because it was never borrowed from the world to begin with. And that power, it lives in you right now, not after you heal, not after you prove yourself, not after the world agrees. Now, the whisper doesn't wait for your perfection. It invites you as you are because it knows that you were never broken, only buried under stories, expectations, identities. And now, one breath at a time, you are uncovering the truth again. And as you do, the world begins to reflect it, not immediately, not always gently, but consistently. Because what you align with internally must eventually shape your external experience, not through force, but through frequency. You don't attract what you want, you attract what you are. And the whisper guides you not toward wanting, but toward being. Being still, being open, being love, being now. This is the invitation. This is the return. This is the gentle revolution of awakening. Not by changing your life, but by remembering the one living underneath it. And that remembrance begins in silence, in solitude, in surrender, in listening again to the whisper that has never stopped believing in you. You don't have to leave your life to live from the whisper. You just have to return to your life differently, with different eyes, with a quieter mind, with a softer heart. The world around you doesn't need to change. The lens you see it through does. When you're rooted in the whisper, even chaos becomes a classroom. Even delays become direction. Even loss becomes liberation because everything begins to speak the language of alignment. It's not about escaping the world. It's about engaging with it from presence. You can still raise children, build businesses, chase dreams, but now you do it from stillness. You're not driven by fear anymore. You're not chasing validation. You're moved by inspiration, not compulsion. You're led by an inner compass that doesn't sway with opinion or outcome. And that's how peace becomes your default, not your reward. The whisper doesn't take you out of the world. It brings you fully into it. You start seeing beauty where others only see problems. You begin hearing meaning in what others call coincidence. You begin walking slower, speaking gentler, and listening more. Not because you're passive, but because you've discovered a power and softness that the ego can't comprehend. A strength that doesn't need to dominate to be real. And your relationships begin to change. Not always because others change, but because you're no longer relating from your wounds. You no longer need others to complete you. You love from overflow, not from lack. You listen without defending. You give without agenda. You forgive without needing to forget. Because when you live from the whisper, you realize that everyone is doing the best they can, even when it doesn't look like it. The whisper teaches compassion, not the kind that tolerates abuse or pretends everything is fine, but the kind that sees beyond behavior into the soul behind it. You stop taking things personally. You stop projecting your pain onto others. You hold space without needing to fix. You begin to understand what every awakened teacher has always known. That true healing is not changing others, but changing the way you see. And the whisper doesn't just shift how you see others. It shifts how you see yourself. You begin to meet yourself without judgment, without shame, without the constant need for improvement. You stop trying to become someone better and start realizing that the truest version of you is already here beneath the noise, beneath the proving, beneath the pretending. You don't need to upgrade. You need to unveil, because underneath every fear is the whisper of faith. Underneath every need to control is the whisper of surrender. Underneath every mask is the whisper of your authentic face. And the more you listen, the more you remember. You remember what it's like to breathe without tension, to love without story, to exist without effort. This is what the mystics knew. This is what the sages whispered across centuries. That the kingdom of heaven is not a place. It is a presence. It is within you. Not later now, not if always. And the whisper is the invitation to return there, not by climbing, but by descending into stillness, into simplicity, into self. The world may not understand. It may call you naive. It may say you've changed. Let it. You weren't sent here to be understood by the unconscious. You were sent here to remember who you are. And by doing so, awaken others. Not with force, not with debate, but with being. Your peace becomes your presence. Your presence becomes your teaching. and your life becomes your message. That's the beauty of living from the whisper. You stop needing to convince anyone. You no longer need external proof. You don't need applause. You don't fear silence because you've heard something more real than anything this world can offer. And once you've heard it, you can't unhear it. Once you've touched truth, you no longer need the crowd's approval. You are approved by something eternal. And yes, there will be days you forget, days the ego pulls you back into noise. That's okay. Don't punish yourself for forgetting. Just return. The whisper never left. It doesn't shame you for getting lost. It simply waits with open arms. Like the sun waits for the flower to bloom again. It is not keeping score. It is keeping space. Sacred open space where your soul can exhale and remember, I am home. There is a rhythm to grace. It arrives not when you try harder, but when you soften, when you let go of the grip. When you stop trying to force healing and allow yourself to be held. This is not a performance. This is not a test. This is a return to what never left. And the whisper is the doorway. Let your life be that doorway for others. Not by preaching, but by presence. Not by trying to fix their storms, but by anchoring in your own calm. The greatest gift you can offer this world is your own wholeness. Not because it makes you special, but because it reminds others that they are too. Let the whisper guide your work, your words, your walk. Let it interrupt your plans. Let it redirect your dreams. Let it choose your path even when it makes no sense because it knows the way. It is not separate from God. It is God speaking not from above, but from within. Not in lightning, but in light. Not in command, but in communion. This is the real transformation. Not changing your life, but changing where you live from. From fear to trust. From thought to presence. From story to soul. And when that shift happens, everything else follows. The external world bends to the frequency of your internal truth. Not as magic, but as law. The universe doesn't reward who you pretend to be. It aligns with who you truly are. And the more you live from that alignment, the less you resist life. You stop fighting what is. You stop resenting what was. You stop fearing what might be. You simply are fully, presently, and beautifully here. And in that hearing, the whisper becomes not something you listen for, but something you live from. Then, let us now walk these final steps together. Not toward an end, but toward a return to the place that never moved, only waited. The whisper doesn't need to close the story with fireworks. It finishes as it began with presence, with breath, with truth that doesn't need to convince because it simply is. Let yourself fall into this moment. No past, no future, just here. There is a holiness in this now that no thought can grasp. It doesn't need to be labeled sacred. It already is. It doesn't need to be earned. It already belongs to you. And the whisper is here in this stillness, gently reminding you you never needed to run. You never needed to prove. You never needed to carry the world on your back to be worthy of its beauty. You are already what you were chasing. The whisper has always been the sound of grace arriving without fanfare. It is the voice of God not coming down, but rising up from within you. A resonance, a frequency, a truth so ancient it cannot be taught, only remembered. And this remembrance, this is your liberation, not from the world, but from the illusion that you are ever separate from it. You are the breath behind the body, the presence behind the personality, the watcher behind the worry, the still point in a turning universe. And once you identify with that truly, not intellectually, but intimately, fear begins to dissolve. Not because you fought it, but because you no longer believe it. The shout has lost its power because the whisper has taken root. There is a light in you that does not go out. No failure can extinguish it. No betrayal can stain it. No amount of time or trauma or noise can remove it. It is untouched, eternal, waiting only to be seen again. And the whisper is the invitation to look inward, not outward, to feel, not analyze, to be, not do. You don't have to earn your way back. You don't have to clean yourself up first. The whisper doesn't ask you to fix what life called sacred. It just says, come home. Come home to your breath. Come home to your peace. Come home to the vast formless presence that lives behind your eyes and beneath your skin, the real you. And in that home, there is no judgment. There is no checklist. There is no waiting room for healing. There is only now. And now is enough. You are enough. Not because you've done enough, but because you are. You exist. you breathe, you love, and that is divinity made visible. So walk now with new eyes, not seeing through wounds, but through wonder, not from scarcity, but from sufficiency. Not as a seeker, but as a revealer. Let your life become the echo of the whisper. Let your footsteps be a prayer. Let your silence be a sermon. Let your very existence radiate the truth that you remember what the world forgot. That presence is power. That peace is the highest success. That love is not something you find. It's what you are when you stop pretending. Let your voice become gentler. Let your gaze become kinder. Let your heart become softer. This is not weakness. This is your return to truth. This is the unraveling of illusion. This is the undoing of everything that was never yours to carry. This is what happens when you choose to listen before the shout. This is what happens when the soul leads. So if the world gets loud again, and it will, don't run, don't react, don't beg it to be quiet, just return. Return to the breath, to the silence, to the whisper, and listen again, because everything you need is already here. Everything you are is already enough, and everything real in you has never been lost.